NACDL is the Association of the Nation's Criminal Defense Bar.
My name is Dr. Divine Pryor. I am the co-founder and executive director of the Center for New Leadership on Urban Solutions. It is the nation's first and the nation's only criminal justice, research, public policy, advocacy, and training center that was created, designed, and run by formerly incarcerated professionals representing every discipline from law to medicine. And in that regard, we have been a voice for justice for going on 2 decades now. And one thing you want to know about us is that we always move towards solutions. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the problem because I think we know what the problem is and has been. I think that we want to spend the majority of our time on the solution. I just want to give a couple of disclaimers. Number one, I want to bring your attention to the use of language. 15 years ago, we launched a language campaign in an attempt to humanize a population that had been dehumanized. That means people who are convicted of crimes, accused of crimes, spent time in jail, prison. We have decided to no longer refer to them as convicts and prisoners and ex-cons and ex-offenders. Instead, we refer to people in prison, and this is really profound. We refer to people in prison as people in prison. Not as prisoners, not as convicts, and the reason why we do that is because they are people. And we don't understand sometimes the power of language. Such as a man thinketh, such as he is. And we know that as long as we refer to people in these derogatory and dehumanizing ways, then we'll look at them as less than human. So we're asking everyone from this point on, when we talk about people who've spent time in prison, we're going to refer to them as formerly incarcerated people. When we talk about people in prison, we're going to refer to them as people in prison. When we talk about people who've been accused of a crime, we're going to talk about people accused of a crime. And I know it's not going to be easy. I know it's going to be some slippage because I know that it's new for some folks to adopt this new language, but I'm just going to ask everyone to kind of try to think about people in prison as people because indeed they are. On that note, we're going to move very quickly, but first let me introduce our panelists, and rather than me attempt to try to read their bios, which you have in your packets, I'm going to introduce them by their name and title and association, and in their opening remarks, I hope they would give you some additional information on who they are. Beginning with how I have it in front of me, we have Dave LaBahn. He's the president and CEO of the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. Dave, could you raise your hand? Yeah. Let's give him a round of applause. Like, who else could have been Dave? But you know, we don't want to always think that the obvious is what it is, so we have to always make sure. Then we have the Honorable Shawn LaGrua, Judge of the Superior Court of Fulton County, Georgia. Would you please raise your hand? And then we have Stephanie Woodard, Solicitor General of Hall County, Georgia. Would you please raise your hand? Now, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't really know what a Solicitor General is, so I'm going to be really interested in what Stephanie Woodard has to say. And how I'd like to do this, I'd like to give them each one of them about 6 or 7 minutes to, yeah, that's a lot of time, right? So much to do with. To talk about who you are, how you got to where you are, and what your vision for justice is. The title of this particular forum is And Justice for All, Voices from the Court. So I want you to start off talking about who you are, how you got to where you are, and your vision for justice, because that'll give us an idea of what you think justice is. And so we're going to start all the way to my far right with Stephanie Woodard.
Thank you. Thank you for the honor of being here. I've been the geek up front with lots of books and taking notes all day. I enjoy learning, and I have learned so much already and look forward to the rest. I am probably, I think, the only prosecutor in the room. Maybe not. It's a secret society, and sometimes the only Republican in the room. The Solicitor General of Hall County is the elected misdemeanor prosecutor. So, like most people understand what a district attorney is, the elected official that prosecutes felonies. I'm the elected official that is in the state court of Hall County prosecuting misdemeanors. That's a very, very tiny part of who I am. I was born in the best trailer parks that money doesn't want to buy in Pickens, South Carolina. I am the child of the first man to get custody in a divorce in a year I really don't want to name because I think I'm the oldest person on this panel too. And my relationship with my father really informed my life. He was an alcoholic and a prescription drug addict before we had words for that. He was also the vice president of an engineering firm and the deacon in his church and a feminist before I knew what that was. So I was raised to think that I could do anything in the world that I wanted to do. My gender had very little to do with my value in this world. Who I was, he taught me, was a powerful person capable of doing things. I lived in a racially segregated community where my best friend was African American and we were not allowed to spend the night with each other. And another young woman from the trailer park whose sister was murdered on a date with a wealthy young man was dismembered and got a really, really life sentence. So I grew up watching money and power and gender and race, and I don't know what the divine has had in store for my life, but I know it has been controlled by that. So I have served a third of my career in prosecution, a third in defense. I was raised by some amazing lawyers on both sides of the V, and then I felt very called to put in for Solicitor General. I love our governor. He's the father of a friend of mine and how I knew him before he became governor. And I'm sure because of that knowledge of each other, he has blessed my life to be a part of some of the amazing work. I serve on the Georgia Commission on Family Violence. I've served on the Criminal Justice Reform Council, and most recently on the JNC, and have had a different opportunity to see power and decisions in that concept. And I'm just honored to be here. And I'm going to turn and look at these amazing people beside me, and thank you for allowing me to be part of your group.
Thank you. So we're going to go right to your immediate left then, and we're going to hear from Dave. Dave and I know each other from some time back, and we've worked on a number of projects, so he's familiar with our work and who we are and our perspective. I think he's going to really add value to the discussion. So, Dave, you're on.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pryor. And I guess I am to the left of the elected solicitor. I'm going to start out with the vision statement that you gave us.
Okay.
Why am I here? What am I doing? What do we try to do every day? And what do I train prosecutors about? It's very, very easy. Do the right thing for the right reasons to the right person. That's what, and anything that doesn't meet all of that objectives ought not to be done. The things that I've been sitting and listening here, it just creates a longer and longer list of the work that we have to do and to keep moving forward. And I would suggest there's been a lot of discussion about Governor Deal. Look back in his resume. What is one of the things that Governor Deal did? He was a prosecutor. I come here as I understand, I've had a role and I've had a 10, and now a 12-year career. So I spent 10 years as a trial prosecutor in California. I started in a very large southern county, very conservative county. And then I went to the north part of the state, and I went to a much smaller office in a very much more challenging, more liberal community to be a prosecutor. After that, I was having such a good time being also an administrator that I thought the thing to do would be go to the state capitol. So I spent, and especially with this group and Angela and your work, I spent 10 years first as the deputy and later the executive director of the California District Attorneys Association. So I know firsthand all the earlier discussions about it's not the right or wrong, It is, do you have the votes? If you have the votes, you're right. If you don't have the votes, you're wrong. There's no moral to the legislature. And the other thing about being an attorney working in the legislative environment is there's a rules committee. Like, we're really accustomed to rules. We're following things here. We won't interrupt each other. We're all great with our court stuff. And now suddenly you can walk in a legislative environment where the rules aren't really the rules because they can change them at any time. And nobody has to wait for anybody else to listen. And many of the elected folks like to express their opinions, especially try being California's prosecutor in front of that particular legislature. Then I was having so much fun in Sacramento, I decided it was time to go across to DC, because bigger capital, that way you have more elected folks and you can have even bigger challenges in your life. I started out at the National District Attorneys Association, spent a couple years there, was a little disappointed that there was too many no's. What I try to do with the association, with APA, our answer is always yes, but then we have to work on what are the parameters of that yes. Because I still have a board of directors. I've got 2 kids in college right now, and so I really do need to be employed at least a couple more years. Then we can go ahead and be free thinking. And that's where now coming on 10 years ago, went over to the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, another national association, predominantly the larger offices. And it's the larger offices because they have more in common with each other many times than they do with other offices within their state. And so one of the things we've done is the convening of the major counties. Those are the top 40 offices. Those top 40 offices prosecute 1/3 of the crime in the country. And so what can we do within our profession to change policy and procedure? And looking here, and Norman, and especially Angeline, both of them keep me very busy, but Norman, I keep answering the phone. Because very early, especially in the area of the racial justice, he called and said, would you be willing? And as Dr. Pryor said, when we entered that area, and this was before there was much attention to it, I know it was very troubling within your organization, but that we weren't going to have a conference if we were questioning, is there a problem? What the conference was going to be about is doing something about it, is having everybody acknowledging, this is where we're at now, what are we going to do? And that was an excellent experience. Also yesterday, people said we ought to lead by example. In my belief, why should I expect that my locally elected prosecutor or their deputies or others are going to get along with their defense counterparts if Norman and I don't get along? Now, you know, and it's that piece of we're all in it together. I generally tell him that I hope his conferences go well, but I also say, hope they don't go too well, you know, because there are some people out there that on behalf of prosecutors we believe should be incarcerated. Not many, but there are some. But the willingness for NACDL or NACDL to reach across the aisle, I think, was huge. The other piece is the different issues. Norman has yet to call me on something that's easy. One of the reading materials that was provided, and I didn't even know the report was out until Angeline gave it a link, was the high volume misdemeanor courts. And Solicitor, I think that's what's so huge here is, so often people pay attention to the felonies. They're not paying attention to the misdemeanors. Misdemeanors are a huge volume. You talk about how people get screwed up lives, it's the misdemeanor cases. And so Norman to include us, and actually our name was in that one as well as the racial justice, and then his willing to be an advisor, because we were looking at HIV and the criminality as it related to that. And so Norman very appropriately attended a couple of meetings, was very thoughtful. I think only in one situation was there a particular elected that had a little different position, and it was lively to have a defense lawyer in our midst. But at the time when it was like, okay, deliberating on the position, Norman's comment also was, this is yours. If it's going to be meaningful, if you're going to affect some change, it's really got to be the prosecutors talking about with the prosecutors. We don't need the defense perspective in that final phraseology, because it will affect that. And then finally, the last panel, Marissa was up here from the Southern Center for Human Rights. So as I was teasing Norman before I walked up, we also put the money where our mouth is there was an individual by the name of Calvin Mann. Calvin Mann was serving life for trafficking a very small amount, and I believe it was crack at the time. And that certainly didn't seem like a sentence on behalf of APA that was a reasonable sentence. And so when the Southern Center reached out, we agreed to look at it. As has been set up at this panel, I have a former Fulton county prosecutor as one of my attorneys working in the area of child abuse. He looked into the case, talked to the warden, and then we weighed in, and Mr. Mann is out into the community now and away from that life sentence. To us, it was a draconian sentence, although I must say that yes, that's one life sentence that we've reversed, but I'm one of those that I have a number of killers that I have put in prison for life. And so it is, I believe there is a role. There are some people that are incredibly dangerous, but there's a lot of folks that are not. And why we're mixing the two of them, I do not understand. And then finally, I think the issue is, as we talk about issues of things like the racial justice, which continues to come up, I think that's been a thing the last couple of years. That, and especially our work with the Safety and Justice Challenge, can we safely reduce those jail populations, and can we pay attention to the racial disparities? Had a phone call just this last week working on another conference, and that particular elected DA was so pleased, not that his particular treatment program was working or the recidivism numbers, we got the judge coming, were way down. It was the issue of racial disparities. The racial disparity report had got it, and it's the first time in his experience the racial disparity was 0. And that is something within our community to get that level is pretty huge. So I know that I've been given a number of questions, but I think at this point I should.
Yeah, we're gonna move to your immediate left, and we want to hear from the Honorable Shawn LaGrua.
Good morning. I am the daughter of an Italian Catholic Army Colonel JAG officer. Dating was not an easy thing when I was growing up, but I think it formed, between he and my mother, formed who I am. I grew up not with a silver spoon. My mother didn't work. My dad had 3 kids under the age of 3 when he was a first lieutenant. But I grew up with values of loyalty, honesty, patriotism. As an Army brat, I lived, I mean, that's good and bad. In these days, it might be better, but when I was growing up, we didn't have Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, computers, so I don't have a lot of childhood friends. The flip side is I got to travel around the world and see places that many people still haven't seen. So I guess it's a balance. I wouldn't say it's good or bad. It's just who I am. I got to go to Venezuela when I was 12 and spend a summer in Caracas because one of my little girlfriend's dads was an exchange student with the military there and saw how those folks lived. I went to high school in Germany and got to see East Berlin before the wall came down. Don't calculate my age. That would be rude. But I remember, because of my dad being in the military, going in a grocery, we were allowed to go outside of the tourist area of East Berlin, and going into a grocery store and being astonished at the kind of food that was available for people. And I tell you all that to say that while not perfect, in my opinion, growing up interested in government, our criminal justice system, or our justice system, criminal or civil, is far from perfect, but it's still the best one in the world. We have the right to have our disputes handled in an open public courtroom by a jury of our citizens. We have the right to vote. We have the right to gripe. When I graduated from law school, I had the opportunity to go in the JAG Corps, but I'd moved around so much I decided to stay here in Georgia, ended up here by happenstance. Became a prosecutor straight out of law school in a felony office, and did that in a number of different offices, as Vernon Pitts well knows, for many, many, many years. I was then a colleague of Stephanie's as the Solicitor General in DeKalb County until they fired me. And all right, you're not from Georgia. I got appointed by a Republican governor in a very Democratic county, and I did not get past the election. So I jokingly say I got fired, I guess, by the citizens of DeKalb County. I worked at the Secretary of State's office for a little while doing elections and securities law, and now I have been on the bench for about 8 years. And I can sort of see the looks out there. She's a prosecutor. That's all she ever did. Why is she here? Let me start with a question, and I'll give you my vision and let Dr. Devine go ahead and take over. I've been in and out the last couple of days, heard a lot of panels, heard a lot of discussions, and one of the things I've heard is that we look at people and we make judgments. I want to turn that around for a minute. I saw a lot of looks as these 3 Atlanta police officers, stand up, folks. came in the room, and looks were not all good. Because y'all have been talking about how bad police officers are for the last 2 days. Not all of them, but some of them. And I'm going to hope to have you reevaluate your automatic opinion in a few minutes, because about 8 years ago, we started a program in my courtroom now called the My Journey Matters program. And I believe, because I've researched it with interns and other folks, I believe it is the only program like it in the country. And that's probably because it's a really risky program for a judge and the community. But we look at young, violent offenders. I'm talking armed robbery, aggravated assault, and burglary. And we try and divert those young people from prison. In Georgia, armed robbery is a minimum mandatory 10-year sentence. I have no choice. If somebody's convicted or pleads guilty to armed robbery, it's 10 years. You can't do anything else. But thankfully, our district attorney has been gracious to work with us. Mr. Pitts and his folks have been gracious to work with us. And I think we have a pretty good success rate. Things have changed over the years in how we do things, but we either put folks on bond or on probation under sentence with very, very, very stringent conditions. They have to come, it's akin, I would think, Vernon, tell me if I'm wrong, to an accountability court for different offenders that we don't usually see, the violent offenders. They have to come see me every month. They have to be in school. They have to bring me their report cards. They have a curfew. They get drug tested. They have to write handwritten book reports, maintain a B average, bring me resumes, job logs, budgets. Took me a while. I used to tell them to bring me a budget. It took me a bunch of months before I figured out they didn't know what budget meant. So now we explain what budget is before they bring it to us. And they don't leave the program until they are educated. And by education, I mean, if possible, a GED or high school diploma and a skill. If they want to go to college, that's great. But if it's a welder, a forklift driver, an HVAC, they are educated, stable, and not coming back. Some of them have been with me 7, 8 years because they haven't gotten their GED. It's become kind of a joke. Could have gone to college. You really love me that much, you want to keep coming here? But that's why I think I'm here this morning.
Well, thank you for being here, and we're going to heat it up a little bit. All of that sounds wonderful, and I really appreciate it, and applaud all the efforts. However, the public still maintains the impression that the court system does not treat everyone the same. And the public maintains the position that the judicial system is not fair. And the court maintains, and based on the words of one very popular attorney who defended O.J. Simpson, stated that justice in America is determined by how much you can afford. Whether that's true or not is not even the issue. The fact that that's the public perception makes it a problem. Why does the public perceive it that way? How does the public perceive it that way? But the bigger question is, what is going to be done to change the public's perception if that's not true? So I'm going to ask one question while I step over to Angela for a second and ask her one. I would like each of you to tell us what is justice to you. From where you sit, you're in the criminal justice system in one form or another, and you want to see justice done. You want to go home at night and be able to sleep and know that you did everything that you could do to ensure that justice, according to how you see it, prevailed. Let's start all the way to our right with Stephanie Woodard, and we want you to tell us, what does justice mean to you, and what do you do to fulfill that particular vision of justice?
You understand what you're doing to me. I am the lowest in the court pecking order, and you keep starting over here.
I don't know why I'm doing this. I somehow believe that you can step up to the plate, and I know you're not going to let me down.
You're right. So the reason the public believes that is it is still right. It is still the climate of our country. I have a current crush on Brian Stevenson. I haven't met him yet. I intend to. I did mention earlier that I'm on the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. I want to say this is the fourth defense council conference that I've been asked to speak at. I don't remember the last time we had a defense attorney speak at the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. So I think if we speak our truth, we speak it into existence. Brian Stevenson needs to come speak at PAC. But I think we're far more concerned, titillated, social media driven by the rich and guilty than the innocent and poor. So justice for me is about not looking at any one of us, the defendant, the person accused of a crime.
I got you. I love it. All right.
And let me say, Benzonetta Tipton Lane in Fulton County in a year I'm not going to identify because y'all don't need to know how old I am, wouldn't allow me as a prosecutor to call the person accused of a crime a defendant. And I learned that lesson as a prosecutor in that moment. But the person accused of the crime, the person affected by the crime, everyone in there should not be defined by a snapshot of the worst moment of their life. And that is what justice is about to me.
Okay, thank you for that. Next, Dave.
Again, I think you're still giving us pretty easy questions.
Oh, I assure you, they're going to get a little harder than me.
All right. So we're just. I'm a kid from California. Grew up in the '60s. I want to be out of business. I only have 4 or 5 more probably working left. By the time I'm done, I don't want there to be any reason for there to be prosecutors. Folks treat each other with dignity and respect. They take care of their disagreements with things other than firearms, and treat their spouses, significant others, whoever it might be, with the same dignity and respect that they expect that we show them as they work through the system. And so that's it. Dignity and respect. Let's all get along, and we don't even have to have a job.
Great. Your Honor?
Shawn, please.
Okay, you got it.
I think justice is that the repercussions should fit the actions. The response to what someone does should be equivalent to what has happened. I'm not going to sit up here and say that I don't think anybody should go to jail. No one, the folks that know me in this room, Vernon, Omar, Stephanie, Drew, would know that's a lie if I said it. And I'm not going to sit up here and lie. But I think whatever justice is should fit. So the punishment should fit the crime and the circumstances. And I guess I look at the crime in a bigger sense than the act that happened. So when I said the consequences should fit the crime, I am encapsulating in that the action, the age, the motivation, the circumstances, the upbringing, the society. So I don't mean that it should just fit the act that happens. And I think that's one of the things we've been trying to do.
Well, that's wonderful to hear, because one of the questions that I'm concerned with is clearing the docket and the expediency that takes place in the courtroom. And let me just inform you that for 5 years I was on the board of directors of the National Legal Aid and Defenders Association, and we conducted a very comprehensive report which suggests that if the court system, if more than 10% of the people who were accused of a crime decided to go to trial, that there would be an implosion in the system, which means by default, the vast majority of cases are solved through plea bargaining. That to me doesn't seem very fair and constitutional. In that context, when each of you learned that mass incarceration was taking place, and you realized that you were a player in that system that was contributing to mass incarceration, what exactly did you do about it? Let's start with you, Shawn.
Okay, that's the whole motivation behind My Journey Matters. I saw a generation or generations of young, predominantly African American men going to jail for 10-year clips at a time. And I'm not gonna walk away from who I am. If your wife gets assaulted at gunpoint tonight, going to her car, knocked down and robbed at gunpoint, I am not going to make an argument that 10 years is not an appropriate sentence. I won't do it. That would be disingenuous for me. With that said, I am going to make the argument that when we've arrested that 17-year-old and that 17-year-old's in front of me, what are we going to do in 10 years when that defendant gets out of custody without an education, without any job skills? We're in a much worse off place. That was not very good English. My mother would be ashamed. We would be in a much poorer place than we are if we try to do something differently. One of the things I found out is one of the big things we're missing, in particular with young people, are expectations. We don't expect them to succeed or do anything, but on the flip side, we don't praise them when they do something well. And those are the sort of the things that we do. The Sheriff's Department calls our court happy clappy court. That's okay with me. We do a lot of clapping, a lot of praising of people for little things. They got good grades. They had a clean urine screen this month. All those things, but they've never been praised for doing anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Dave, what do you do?
What do we do, and what have I done, and how do we make things better? I'm looking kind of the list that we were presented walking into this panel. The first and foremost right away is alternatives to prosecution. On behalf of APA, we are all for alternatives. Let's go. Let's figure it out. I love the discussion here with the public defender working with Mr. Howard and coming together and agreeing. Okay, let's take this court and let's see what happens. We need to be in it together. We need to build and get involved in programs if necessary, because I think as we head to the solicitor, some of these misdemeanor violations, do we really need to do anything? And if we do something, are we making things better or are we making it worse? And are we only kind of creating even larger infrastructure? So on behalf of, to answer your question, let's start our way with alternatives. Then things like the diversion programs, deflection programs, they work. Mental health. Why do we have to have everybody's problems? So on behalf of prosecutors, and I think even looking at our colleagues over there in the police, and after I leave this meeting, I'll be flying to South Dakota for a police prosecutor meeting. Why is it that we are the dumping ground for the failures of the other systems? What happens in education? When they fail, where do they end up? They end up with us. When you've got mental health issues, where do they end up? They end up with us. Where they've got drug addictions or co-occurring disorders, where do they end up? They end up with all of us. So we get everybody's problems. In fact, I'm going to hopefully cause a little bit of discussion here.
Sure.
The issue of reentry. Many of the folks that we deal with every single day, there's no reentry for them. They've never entered. So how do you?
Dave's been listening to me. All right, Dave. Go ahead now.
Okay. So how do you re-enter when you don't have the skills? I love what the judge was saying. You know, things like a GED. One of my prosecutors was calling me and saying like, oh, they've got all these great programs now, but you know what? You know what my guys need? They need a driver's license. If they don't get a driver's license, then they're going to get hooked up again, and now they're all back in it again, and now you've got all sorts of problems. So what are we doing? Those are the kinds of things we're looking at as a national organization, things like driving on a suspended license. You got some ideas of how we deal with that, get it out of there. The fines and fees stuff, we've been involved in that. Let's just have some honesty. When Judge LaGrua says it's a $100 fine, it ought to be a $100 fine. It ought not to be $1,025 because now we've added up everything else in there. And as someone else said, community service, anything, there ought to be some accountability. So I'll put the prosecutor hat on, but it not to be poverty court. As I said, I've got 2 kids in college. Guess who pays their traffic tickets and also gets on their case about knock it off, otherwise the car is going to be mine again. Cooperation solutions, evidence-based prosecution. So community prosecution, all of the problem-solving courts, the problem-solving prosecutors, stuff that we can do, stuff that the court and bench can help with. And again, I'm going to look to the defense. Some of the best places in the country, and I'll pick on Milwaukee for 30 seconds, they're screening everybody, but they're getting them a defense lawyer right away. And the cooperation from the defense saying that lots of jurisdictions have done risk assessments, but actually let's get to the needs assessment. Let's get to that root cause and see what is going on in that individual's life right now so they don't keep coming back. We just don't need the business. And then the adversarial perspective. I don't think you have to drop your adversarial role to try to work together towards, can we do things better? And can we improve the system? And can we reduce some of the pressures that are in our community, as well as getting folks to get along? At a lot of the major offices, again, the homicide numbers are continuing to rise because people are going from disagreement to gun. There's got to be that middle ground that people can agree to disagree, and it doesn't end up in a horrific criminal case. So, how's that?
Okay, that's good. Stephanie Woodard, what is the Solicitor General doing in the context of mass incarceration? People are being locked up in record numbers. America, has the dubious position of incarcerating more of its citizens than any other nation in the world. We're destroying families. We're decimating communities. We know what the damage is, and you're a part of the system that's contributing to that. So what are you as a person doing to withdraw from that?
So answering in my role currently as Solicitor General, I hire, half of my attorneys have criminal records. I don't think that someone should be involved in prosecution if they don't understand what it feels like to be prosecuted. I raise baby lawyers. I get a lot of talent right out of law school. I don't care if you want to be a career prosecutor. I don't care if you want to be a defense attorney. I don't care if you think you want to be a civil litigator. I'll try to change that mind. And I try to teach you what it is to be a human in the system. I ask them to look not at that snapshot of the worst moment, but to look behind it and see what the real problems are and attempt to move everyone, person accused of a crime, person affected by a crime, family affected by the crime, closer to healthy. It is not our job to fix it. It is incumbent on us to not make it worse. And I ask them to challenge no's. So, and that was part of what I did, part of what my dad taught me to do all the way through as a defense attorney, as a prosecutor, a frontline prosecutor. When the correctional institution says people who were formerly incarcerated can't come back and support the people they left behind, why? When we ship people across the state from their support, why? And if you've got a voice, we should ask that question of the system, even when we're part of the system.
Thank you for that. Thank you. And we're just going to keep pushing a little further because we want to get more and more descriptive. But let me, and I see we have folks waiting online, so I'm not going to keep you waiting too long. So just be a little patient with me, but I'm definitely going to get to you because I want to share with you just a few innovations. I mean, I'm from New York, and I want to believe that we are the innovators. I mean, although there are other folks that might
give Southerners
that.
a chance, man.
But yeah, we're gonna give you a chance. We're gonna give you a chance in a minute. But let me tell you that some of the things that
the
we're
New York
doing.
DAs are pretty good.
Let me tell you some of the things we're doing in New York that's I think is unprecedented. First of all, we have created over the last few years the People's Police Academy. It's the first academy in the world, probably, where police officers are trained by civilian experts. But it goes further than that. Not only are they trained by civilian experts, they're trained by formerly incarcerated professionals. They're trained by former gang members. This is in New York City, of all places. And we've already trained a few hundred folks, because everybody starts with a pilot. The evaluation has come back, and the officers have pretty much said, best training I've ever been to. And the reason why, because they're getting lived, breathed experience coming directly out of the community. This is the first time that they're hearing a perspective that they may not have heard before, may have been resistant to, may not have exposure to, whatever. But they're actually given an opportunity to breathe out. And in the context of understanding that public safety is not a law enforcement exclusive purview, that the only way public safety can and will happen is when there's shared responsibility, when everyone takes accountability for the role that they play in contributing to public safety. That's how we're moving it. When my office moved on the block we were on, we had a major gang problem. And folks said, wow, how y'all gonna handle that? I said, easy, we're gonna hire the gang members. That's what we did. Now we don't have a gang problem anymore. So the person that was one of the primary players of the gang, I guess you call him an OG, a big homie, now works for us, and his crew comes in. But the thing is that all of them had needs too. People don't wake up and decide to be in a gang. People don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, I want to kill somebody, I want to hurt somebody. People have needs and challenges, you know. And what we found out, and this blew a lot of folks' mind when they began to talk to these young people who were involved in gangs and asking them why. One young man said, well, why do you think they let me go to school every day? Everybody on the block is in the gang. So in order for me to go to school, go to the store for my mother, in order for me to live on the block, I had to be in the gang. So what do we lock him up for that? I mean, you know, there are real issues. And so when these issues are brought into a context where law enforcement professionals can hear from the community, they can see a whole different perspective. So on that note, because we want to push the envelope, I want to know, and then we're going to, there's so many questions that I can ask. I'm trying to ask the one that's going to allow you to get right to the meat. So just give me a second. How difficult is it, or would it be, for you to change the culture of the bench, of the prosecutor's office, of the criminal justice system in any way? How difficult is it, or would it be, for you to change the culture to one that is more thoughtful, more scrupulous, more transparent, and more fairer, so that we can begin the process of restoring confidence and respect that the public has for the system? I'm going to start right to my immediate right this time with Shawn.
Well, I think you have to start. I'm not going to get into the education piece yet. I'm just going to talk about starting at the beginning of the criminal justice piece. And I understand it starts before that. It starts with family, it starts with education, but I'm just starting at the criminal justice piece.
Okay.
And I think it starts with law enforcement. And I'm happy to say that our police chief here in Atlanta is incredibly progressive in that field. She's one of the first in the country that has trained her officers in the mental health arena. So now they are not arresting everyone. When they see there's a mental health problem, they've set up centers where they go to get the offenders help and divert them. So they're not arresting them, they're helping them. The same police chief is responsible for these three awesome officers to my right that are here today, because she got a federal grant. And these three officers, and this is why they're here, and I told you I'd get to it, are assigned completely full-time to the My Journey Matters program, not to arrest the participants, to mentor them, to counsel them, to check on them, to take them on field trips to the Civil Rights Museum, to the Rialto Theater to see a play that they've never seen. I heard a large, and I think it was this gentleman standing in the back in the gray shirt waiting to ask a question, Charlie, what's your last name? Irvin. I think yesterday he was one of the ones talking about exposure, exposing folks to things. And that's what these officers are doing. They're mentoring and taking these kids to these things. And so not only are they exposing them, we're exposing young people to the police in a good way instead of a bad way. That doesn't take the taint away from all of it, but I think it's a huge start for there to be a discussion and for the relationship between young offenders, because these are folks that are primarily on probation with me. Their whole families are interacting with the police in a positive way. And these three officers volunteer for this. They don't get assigned, they volunteered. They came out of the school police, and they're doing a phenomenal job. And they have one of my participants here who is hopefully going to be diverted from the system because of the mentorship of these officers.
Thank you for that. And before I go to Dave, again, I just want to insert, because I know the language thing it takes time to develop, but when you think of a young person, whether they've been convicted, they've been accused, I just want you to just simply think of them as a young person who has been accused, who's been convicted, but they're still young, they're still a human, because I'm telling you that the power of language is so transformative.
Great.
And when I begin to see your humanity first, before I see anything else, that changes the way I respond to you, interact with you. And so I'm going to continue. I'm going to stay on this language piece as I've been, and my colleague Eddie Ellis, who's gone on to be with the Ancestors, push this language piece. So when I look at CNN now and MSNBC and I hear them talking about formerly incarcerated people, it makes my heart smile. I know where it all started. It started in our shop in New York City. So I just want to push that. Dave, let's continue on.
All right. When you talk about culture change, one of the things I haven't touched is we don't have a criminal justice system. There is no such thing. When I meet with a lot of foreign delegations, they can't understand, and you all know there's a little turbulence between the president and the AG right now.
Get out of here.
Yeah, there appears to be something out there. They don't understand. Like the president can't order the AG says, and then this, the local police department will go ahead and arrest, and the judge will convict that individual.
Judges don't convict, juries convict.
There we go.
Right.
See,
That's
we're-
right.
Just want to make sure we're all on the
Clarify the
same page here.
roles.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Apparently, there's no bench trials here.
There are no criminal bench trials in
criminal bench
Fulton
trials.
County.
There we go.
Okay.
Vernon,
We
Not for
appreciate that
felonies. There we
clarity.
go. There we go.
Okay.
I love it. I love the dialogue. I'm learning. See,
Yeah,
even old people learn.
That's right. That's right.
But anyway, starting with, we have 3,000 disparate criminal justice systems out there. And so they are all operating independently. And I will say on behalf of prosecutors, the vast majority, every profession has weak links, right? But the vast majority are trying to do the right things for the right reasons. All of them have different struggles. So communities that have things like the Criminal Justice Coordinating Councils, I assume Fulton County probably has one, that brings together the defense, brings the prosecutors, the bar, the probation, parole, all the chiefs, the sheriffs, whoever's involved in that. That's the way of getting people together to make them struggle with the problems. Why do I think there have been so many more changes recently? It's data. It's the free-flowing information that's out there, and on behalf of prosecutors' office, we're pushing them. Put your data out there. Go and look and see what it is. It's been surprising to some of the data folks that the elected prosecutors are some of the very best. That when you sit down and say, look what you're doing, look at the results of this, that's not what their intention was. And our folks are problem solvers. So most of them are going to do that. How do I do change management? Because that is a lot of what I do is travel around and get people to do things differently. You got to always have in the back of the mind, what's in it for me, right? Because you're pushing down. It's within the law enforcement, it is paramilitary. They will follow orders and directions. Prosecutors' offices, they are institutional, and when the DA says or the solicitor says, those under him or her will answer to that. But the very best way, because we're a bottom-up system, is do your change bottom-up. What is it? What's going on? You look at the very best diversions and deflection programs. They started because it's the baby lawyers, and I love your comment, Solicitor, that you talked about the babies. It's those coming up from the bottom saying, why are we doing this? Especially now our millennials, they're asking a lot of the questions, and I love the Eeyores of the world that tell me no and it won't work, and then why won't it, or what's the problem? Start from there. That's how you create lasting change, and data is the area that gets you there. Is look at your criminal justice data. I do not go into an office anymore unless they've already pulled their numbers. Who's in the jail? How long are they there for? Earlier discussion, things like probation violations. You have a weak link. Let's find out where it is. Because that's the piece to start working on right now, because that's the easy one. Then you can go to the harder cases.
So, Dave, let's move very quickly to the Solicitor General to answer that question. And I want to go to the floor because I see we have, looks like about 5 folks. We definitely want to get their questions, and then I hopefully can get you guys to make a closing remark. But before I have our Solicitor General answer the question, I just want to say something that pertains specifically to our officers sitting to my immediate right, so I can continue them on that path that they're on. We've designed something in New York that did not exist, and it's a protocol for pre-booking arrest. Now I know everybody says they're doing arrest diversion, but pre-booking arrest diversion is different. And why is it different? Because pre-booking arrest diversion means that you don't get arrested. You don't get fingerprinted, your mugshot's not taken, there's no data that's taken from you that, undermines your anonymity. And the reason why we do that, because a lot of people don't understand that an arrest can have just as much impact as a conviction.
That's right.
And particularly in the day of technology when information is transferred back and forth. And particularly because there's so many errors on the rap sheet. But even if not, when you're arrested, it creates a cycle on your rap sheet. And the rap sheet stands for Record of Arrest and Prosecution. So both the arrest and prosecution information is on the same sheet. When the employer does the background check, and sees that. Do you think they're taking the time to distinguish between, oh, you were just arrested and not convicted, or the case was thrown out or dismissed, or they'll say, yeah, okay, explain, thank you, we'll be calling you. And of course, that call never comes. So the only way we're going to stem the tide of mass incarceration, we have to attack it at the area of mass arrest. And so anytime an officer makes an arrest, make sure it's a good arrest. Because once you arrest that young person, once you fingerprint them, you have put their life on a total different trajectory. And we have officers that live in counties around New York who have made a decision that they'll do everything they can to not have to arrest that youth because they understand the impact of the arrest. I want our police officers to understand that before you make an arrest, understand that when you arrest this young person, whether they get convicted or not, they can never be an officer. They can't be a school teacher. They ain't going to be in the CIA, the FBI. Their life chances have just been derailed. And we know this because we're here to look at collateral consequences. And that is one of the major consequences of arrest. Never mind conviction. Just wanted to point it out. Solicitor General, let's hear from you, and then we're going to take it to the floor.
Well, before I answer, I want to say something because I don't want to sound critical of this system in a way that's personal. I spent my youth wanting to be in this arena because it's supposed to be where we bring the very best of us to solve our very worst problems. And so when I'm going to speak in a critical manner of all of us in that arena, I want you to know that it comes from a love and a longing of this system and what I know it can be. But we have to challenge all of us, prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges, to go outside of what we know. I've learned so much from these past 24 hours, taking more notes, just being presented with some different facets. I'm thrilled to have the exposure. I don't think my judges, and I'm going to speak just to my court, where I have 3 educated, well-meaning, servant-hearted white men who grew up in what I would consider privilege, that never had domestic violence in their home, that had very little exposure to gangs. You have to expose them to otherness. Mm-hmm. You have to expect change. You have to encourage change. And it's not done with the screaming. And I'm not talking about a good closing argument. I'm talking about the spirit that we so quickly unsheath in our debates with each other. It's an exposure, it's an encouragement, it's an expectation before we get to demand. Maya Angelou said, when we know better, we do better. So talk to me, teach me, hear me back, and that's how we get someplace different.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. We're going to go to the audience. Let me let you know that we do have 20 minutes left. I'm going to hopefully get to everyone's question, but please just ask your question so that whoever can answer it can answer it. And I want to hopefully get to everyone, but if I don't get to you, let me apologize in advance because I have to end on time. We have a very special presentation. So let's begin with the gentleman in the front.
Good afternoon. My name is Timothy Wilkinson from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Reentry Court Services of Greater Baton Rouge. I'm also a person who used to be in prison. Okay. I spent over 17 years in prison because at the age of 19, I decided that I wanted to rob some businesses. And in doing so, I heard a brother say it yesterday, it became an addiction. So I ultimately ended with 21 counts. Life-changing for me and my family, of course. Wasn't raised in the streets, but it happened, and it was something that we had to deal with. Okay. Initially, just... Can
I just get you, seriously, to answer the question? You got a lot of folks behind you, and I want to really get to everyone.
Sure. Shawn, you mentioned that if a certain crime occurred, you believe that a person should get 10 years, and there are some people. You gave the example of someone's wife was robbed and beat outside in the parking lot. That was the example you gave, and you said a 10-year sentence. I'm here to tell you that if someone robs or commits a crime, every person is not due the same sentence. We understand that every state that they have.
Sir, can you just get right to the question? Because we're running out of time, really, and I want to get to everyone on the line. Just out of fairness to everyone.
Right. why is it that you feel that the punishment for a crime or the punishment that a person receives should be reflective of that crime when every person is not the same?
I think you
Thank you
missed
for the
the
question.
second part of my example. What I said was, I wouldn't argue that a 10-year sentence was not an appropriate sentence for somebody who hit your wife in the head with a gun, robbed her, knocked her down. I think you missed the second part where I said, but that doesn't help us in 10 years. And as I explained the program, we are diverting young people charged with violent crimes, armed robberies, aggravated assaults, and burglaries. We are trying not to send them to prison. And so I'm not a believer in mandatory minimums. I think they're a bad idea. It's like everything else in this country, we swing from one extreme to the other. We went to mandatory minimums when a life sentence in Georgia meant 7 years. So if you murdered someone and got a life sentence, you were eligible to be out in 7 years. So all of a sudden, we went to the extreme opposite and came up with mandatory minimums. I don't think either one is good. I think all of the facts and circumstances of a particular case should be looked at when it comes to consequences. And I think that's what I've been trying to do since we started the My Journey Matters program 8 years ago.
Thank you for that. Let's take the next question, and let's just keep it moving.
Okay, even though I have a whole lot going on in my head, I'm gonna try to break it down. Why is it that a 12-year-old rape victim can go into a court and point out somebody who raped them, then that same court don't say nothing, don't send them to no type of therapy or nothing, but sentence them to a life sentence a few years later, knowing that they sent this broken person back into society?
Thank you. Excellent question. Excellent question. Who wants to take that?
There we go. I know where that's at. That is part of the problem. And I think yesterday somebody referred to the issue being the Department of Corrections. Reentry needs to start at the point of entry, and you are exactly right. Whatever led that individual to rape that 12-year-old, there are some significant baseline issues and problems with them. And so, yes, when they get released, they ought to be better than when they were. Or there's not enough help for the victim.
The victim.
I was 12 years old. I went and the district attorney used me to get a conviction.
And never.
A few years later, that same district attorney sentenced me to a life sentence, but didn't send me to give me no help.
Okay, then that is an absolute failure by the district attorney's office. That's why there's the Victims of Crime Fund out there. That's why the offices should be getting the therapy and counseling. I had no idea that you were talking about the victim not getting any help, and I'm very, very sorry, because absolutely they failed you.
Yeah, and thank you for that question. Excellent observation. I wish we had more time because I would like to take that a little deeper. But let's take the next one.
Hi.
Jared, how you doing?
How you doing, Doctor?
All right, cool.
Jared Childs for Brooklyn Defender Services. One question, I'll try to keep it very quick. So I was at a state legislative hearing less than a year ago about healthcare in prisons and jails. It was around budget season, and a sheriff of a small county in upstate New York, who's the head of the Sheriff's Association, talked about the same sort of question that Mr. LaBahn asked. Why are society's problems dumped on us, right? Not exactly person-first language, but talking about, we are called on to arrest, to pick up people in mental health crisis. What do? We take them to the hospital, and if there's a bed, they go to the hospital. If there's not a bed, we take them to jail. So he was saying the same thing you're saying. Why are we left with this problem? What he didn't say was, we need to raise taxes to pay for more hospital beds. Understandably, he's in a small upstate Republican county.
Okay, Jared,
but what he also didn't say,
I got to be a little firm. Can we get right to the question?
Would anyone on this panel say, or would you, Mr. LaBahn, say, what he didn't say is, the government should reallocate resources away from police, away from jails, away from these empty jail cells, and towards the sort of mental health treatment, community-based, residential, et cetera, that could address these problems without the criminal legal system?
Thank you for the question.
Absolutely, and I think that the jurisdictions, Miami-Dade is the one that comes to mind. Those that have done well have looked at what's your cost factor, and then it's not a cost savings, it's a cost shift. So you're moving it from one to the other. Also, different areas in the country have passed ballot measures, especially things like sales tax, to go towards mental health. Those that have it have greater resources. It's a much, much better system. Also, some of the rural sheriffs are also frustrated because in order for them to get them into that bed, They must, quote, stabilize the individual in crisis. What does that mean? That means your patrol officer's got to go to the emergency room, sit there with the individual until they're, quote, stabilized. And I was thinking of one county and then a 3-hour drive to the mental health bed. Again, that's not going to happen. That is not a system that is going to work. They're going to end up in the jail.
Thank you. Next question.
Thank you, Dr. Pryor. Thank you, all of you, for coming today. Directed to the police officers who are here, I will tell you my experience has been working on criminal justice system reforms for 2 decades, that oftentimes the police are better allies for us than either the prosecutors or the court is. So I just want to put that out there, that there are times when we can work with the police to get some meaningful reforms. I had to change my question because the judge took it away from me with mandatory minimums. So my question is more along the lines of access to counsel. I come from a state where you have a statewide system, the first in the United States of America, to provide counsel for poor people accused of crime going all the way back to 1941. So what I would like to...
Can I get you to zoom right in? I mean, we're down to like minutes now, and I want
Well,
to
here
get
it comes.
Come
Here
on,
it comes.
hit me with it. Hit me with it.
What, if any, efforts, either individually or institutionally, have you made to enhance the right to counsel in your state and your jurisdictions? I'll finish with this. We teach our young lawyers that it's supposed to be a truth discerning process. And the only way it works that way is if each side is adequately resourced. What we have seen is,
but we
you
have
know,
to
the
take
side
your
that's
question.
adequately resourced and the side that isn't.
So we have the question. Who wants to provide the answer to the question?
I'll be happy. And I'm going to point to Vernon Pitts, our chief public defender in the Fulton County Circuit. We have a phenomenal public defender's office. They've increased funding lately. The Criminal Justice Coordinating Council and the Public Defender Standards Council have been very active at the legislature. Am I going to say they have all the funds they need? They don't. I acknowledge that. But I would point out one thing that I think is a fallacy in the system, and that is that public defenders are substandard lawyers. It's not true. They're some of the best lawyers I've seen. You can buy as bad an attorney as you can buy a good attorney. So do I think we need more resources on that side? Absolutely. I think we need to be proactive, and I've volunteered to Mr. Pitts and the head of the Public Defender Standards Council to go to the legislature and tell them what great jobs they do and what resources they need. And I think we should be talking about that statewide and nationally.
Right. Because I don't know why a prosecutor would even want to go to bat with someone who they know doesn't have the same resources
I
they
can
do.
tell you, I was a prosecutor most of my life. The worst thing is to deal with a bad attorney on the other side. I'd rather have a good attorney than a bad attorney.
That's the
any
spirit.
day.
Yeah.
Saeed, let's go.
Hi. So as a black female who identifies as a millennial, I'm in a space or mindset where I question that wherever there's a space that's majority black and brown, or a lot of black people, there always tends to be police officers with guns showing up. And that leads to my question of, in your spaces of power, what are you doing to not normalize the concept that if a person is suffering from mental illness, if a child is failing in schools, that the response should not be police officers or more police officers, but what does it look like to actually give teachers a better pay increase? What does it look like to put social workers who are unarmed in the school, rather than the mentality that you should put more police officers who are not trained in that field to do so? We're willing to spend more money, but yet negating the fact that we have doctors who go to school for years and years, but we're gonna give a police officer 40 hours of training to do mental health and be able to quickly respond to that. So what are you doing in your spaces of power to shift that narrative that the answer to social problems and social ills is not police, but more funding into social welfare spaces?
Sure. I like it. Who wants to take that?
I'll take it.
Thank you for that question.
I'll take it because we were, on behalf of APA, we were very pleased to join the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. And again, on behalf of prosecutors, we do not like the phrase school to prison, because it's like, no, this practically for us, and it's kind of a bit of the chalkboard. So we got involved in school to court. So I have personally been here with both Fulton County schools as well as Atlanta schools of saying, first, your school resource officer is not supposed to be there for mental health, discipline, or all that kind of stuff. They are supposed to be a school safety officer. That's their role. If you weren't going to dial 911, why would you call a safety officer into a classroom? I'm going to graphically use the South Carolina example because it's so good. The sheriff said, shame on the deputy for overturning the girl that was on the cell phone, but at the same time, shame on the school for calling in a deputy that you can't even do discipline in your own thing. So to us is cut it out. We did not go to law school. Folks do not become judges to sit there and work on school discipline. Flat, no way. And yes, the schools that are better are the schools that have their own social work and psychologists and such. That's a better thing going on, and your Fulton County Schools is one of them that has spent a lot of effort at cutting this down. And we were here with your chief probation officer. None of us want more work, and I met with your district attorney before we came in here. Nobody wants to see those cases, and I assume Mr. Pitts is going to nod too, that the public defender, that's not why they went to law school, is to handle something like that. So you hit it right on.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. We're down to minutes. Let's take our last two questions. Let's get both questions so that we can get the answers, and then we'll be able to close on time.
My question specifically is to the judge, and then I'll frame it really quickly. What will you do specifically to work towards changing the climate and the environments of how we work together? What I mean, the frame. I've been shaking since I was standing there when you guys came in the room. I was triggered. I had two people with guns on walk past me behind me, and someone else with a badge. I was incarcerated before. I've been to 4 of these. Nobody has ever been in a room with guns on and a badge. We want our incarcerated people to participate. When they walked in, I even said, is this the choir? They're being bodyguards? Who is this? Nobody spoke, except for the young lady who said, I'm not a singer. How do we change that environment to make it more welcoming to people to participate if we set up a courtroom in this room right now? That is how it looks when we're in the courtroom, the bailiffs and the suspect or the defendant, the judge, and we have to present our case. How do we change this environment and be more activist in doing it? Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent question. Let's take the last question, and then we're going to let them answer them so we can close out. Thank you. Excellent question.
All right. Quickly, I'll just think about a couple of things that parents ask me. Similar situation I've seen where a young lady was persuaded by an older gentleman to have sex, and then turned around. The young lady committed armed robbery. In one case, she's not mature enough to be manipulated by the older guy, but when she committed armed robbery, now she has there's a possibility she can get a mandatory 10 years. Is she still not mature enough, or vice versa? I know a young guy that's going through the same situation. How do the DA or how do the judge look at these cases and say, well, she wasn't mature enough to identify with the old guy, but at the same time she committed armed robbery. She can get 10 years in prison, which definitely that can disrupt her life as well. How do we look at these cases and say that a person is mature enough to make one decision on one case, but not mature enough to make it on another case?
Those are two excellent questions. Let that be your closing remarks. Let me go all the way to my far right, and let's bring it on home. We have a minute apiece. Let's close out.
So what I hope that they do is look at those cases as a person and not in some sort of formulaic, mandatory description, and they see the person involved in that. I talk about sphere of influence to everyone in my world, and I want to answer that question. I really try to look at my sphere of influence and take what I know and what I've been exposed to and bring it to that area. So we went to the legislature and asked for pay parity between public defenders and prosecutors in a joint effort between the Georgia Public Defender Standards Council and the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. That had never happened in my lifetime. That's the way it should be. And we hold each other accountable for what we bring into that world. I think that we have to have a safety area. I'm incredibly sorry that the gentleman who shared so much yesterday is triggered and has been traumatized by the system, because I don't want to add insult to what has already been so injurious. But the reality is Judge LaGrua works in a courthouse where a judge that I respected was shot and killed during an incredibly tense situation. The officers aren't specifically intending to intimidate anyone in here. They're not bringing that energy here. In fact, they're here because their energy is invested very differently. But we have to have some safety in those areas. If it needs to look differently, if we need to carry that differently, then let's talk about that. But this is about having that arena safe, informed, trauma-informed for everyone. Victims treated with dignity, people accused of crimes treated with dignity, and safety. So thank you for having me in this arena, and thank you for what you've taught me.
And thank you for your remarks. Dave, you have 30 seconds now.
I want to give my 30 seconds to the young person who's with us. Would you be willing to talk?
That's awesome.
Be also ready. Go ahead, sis. You got 30 seconds.
Go ahead. You don't need to be scared. Go ahead. Come on.
I used to.
Yes,
All right. Okay.
We got your back.
My name is Demetria Kendrick. I'm 19 years old. I've actually learned a lot from being in this program. Jail is not where you want to be at all. Like, I miss my mama, my family. Like, it just is not the move at all. Judge LaGrua is actually a good judge. Like, at first, I didn't like her. I'm not even gonna lie. I didn't.
You don't say.
Because I just thought she was mean, but she actually gives all the young people a chance, honestly. And I thank her for this experience.
What do you think about Officer Griffin?
Oh, Officer Griffin is my favorite. Even though she turned me over to Officer Living. But both of them, all of them, they cool.
And you really hear that. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. Okay, Your Honor, you got 10 seconds and you closing this out.
Got it. I'm going to try and answer the question real quick about the officers at Charlie's question. And thankfully, Stephanie covered most of it. But the thing I want you to realize is anybody can be in here with a gun openly. It's not just the police officers, at least here. The other thing I would note for you is they're not in uniform on purpose. They dress not in uniform when they deal with the young people they deal with for just some of the things you're talking about. So I think it's a discussion we need to have. I hope some of you take away and can take back to your jurisdictions the idea that you can talk to your judges. Some of them, I get it. Not everybody's going to be receptive. But I think if you talk to them about things that work, you're welcome to have them call me. I'll be happy to talk to folks. We're at 8 years, and the DA, the public defender, everybody supports it. The defense bar, Drew Finling, and all of his colleagues support it because it is an alternative for young people to avoid long prison sentences. Thank you all for having me. And at this point,
thank you. Let's give a round of applause to this extraordinary panel. We appreciate everything you've offered. And thank you for coming out. We appreciate you. And now let's move on to the rest of our program. Thanks so much.